Welcome back, you filthy exiles, and I might be a few hours late to the party here, but anyway, we got some additional patch notes that came out earlier today. Basically, if you go to the patch notes page, I'll put it in a link in the description. You just scroll all the way down to the bottom, and you'll get to these additional patch notes that are covered off on further changes that GGG are making on the live. So, from a quick cursory read, and this video won't be too long. These are pretty good changes as an overall, so we'll just talk through these as we go. So basically, continue to incrementally improve sound. We really don't care too much about that, right? It's good at the end of the day. Player changes. Ground effects captured by whirlwinds now only last 4 seconds before the whirlwind reverts to its normal state. One would look at that as somewhat of a nerf, but not a huge nerf, right? The big one here is the Witch Hunter changes. So the Weapon Master notable passive skill now grants 100 passive skill points that become a weapon set skill point. Previously, this was only 20 points. Basically, what this means is that you could basically have 2 builds in one build. So you could have an entire different configuration with a weapon switch, whether it be melee converted to range or range converted to melee, or a setup between the two, or something of that nature. Anyway, there's some crazy stuff that people are going to figure out with Witch Hunter. I actually think this is one of the things that makes Witch Hunter like one of the coolest ascendancies in the game now. Is simply because of this, and with all the other changes, I definitely want to try re-rolling like a melee spear-based Witch Hunter for this league, because I think Witch Hunter is going to be where it's at. There's some pretty cool tech that can come with that. The next big change is Ice Tomb. So there really wasn't a lot of function with Ice Tomb. So basically, Ice Tomb unique body armor now grants you gain Cold's Thorns equal to 10 to 18% of your mana. This is actually really good for, well, Thorns builds. So silly as Lily, I'll put a vid link down below. Came up with a theory craft. I featured it in my curation video this morning. This is some pretty cool stuff. Now, I was thinking when this comes to mind, like stacking Arctic armor with Wind Dancer and then stacking this on top could actually be really cool. Now, I don't really know if I'd go the Infernalist route, just because I'm not a stickler for Infernalist personally. But the thing that comes to mind with this is potentially the Titan or the Monk could be pretty good synergistic ways to gear with this. Also the Amazon, because of elemental damage that you can get out of that. But anyway, this is a pretty cool change, and hopefully this is the direction they take with new uniques that come into the game. Very much Thorns is a mechanic that's here to stay, and that's a good thing because Thorns is actually a pretty cool build setup. Other things that are changing, item changes. So crackling, arcing, and bolting quarterstaffs now have inherent physical damage, as well as a small amount of inherent lightning damage. This is actually a pretty good buff, which means that these damage rates are just going to lift up like monk damage and Amazon damage and stuff like that, depending on what you want to use with quarterstaffs. As with, pardon me, different cultist, adherent, and fanatic bows now have inherent physical damage, as well as a small amount of inherent chaos damage. Again, this is somewhat of a buff, depends on how they scale the weapon damages. There's a new aiming mode that's being added into the game. I'm not sure what this looks like at this stage, but this could be pretty cool. The big thing here is you now keep sprinting. You added a new keep sprint while moving gameplay interface option. So basically, once you once you dodge roll in a sprint, you can take your finger off the spacebar and keep moving. It's almost like somebody at GGG was literally watching Baron and I's Coffee and Cast podcast, because this was one of the topics that we discussed about having something to toggle your sprint function on. But at this stage, GGG is just fixing problems that we haven't even raised yet, so that's fantastic. Of all the changes, I think this is like one of the coolest changes, because this was the thing that I was like, I don't mind hitting the space bar once, but sitting there and like holding down on it, this is fantastic. Like the reward is being able to move quick. The risk is getting knocked down, right? So I think this is a pretty fair go. They also added an option to assign your equipped weapon or weapons to both of your weapon sets instead of needing to use different items in each weapon set. I think this was a change that they were like looking at. No, it was a weapon set locking in the last sort of patch run through. But anyway, this is pretty cool. Another couple of updates here. So effects which don't hit but ignite targets as though they did, such as from Incinerate and in Ignited Ground, also inflict flammability, but are not able to ignite targets until until the target has 50% flammability. So basically, they just reduce the requirement down to 50% from 100% for those particular skills, so that ignites more pliable at that point. I think this is a good change, and it means Incinerate isn't discriminated against, because sort of Incinerate implies that there should be an element of like auto ignite on the build. Okay, the next change is there's a sort of juggling of the accuracy fall off penalty. Um, Not a mathematician, but I think this basically just says the further away you are, the greater the penalty is. That's fair game, right? It stops you from off screening if you haven't invested in accuracy. Cold Snap, they already announced that they were reworking this. Basically, from what I can see here, uh, there seems to be some nerf on flat cold damage, but it spreads damage across 3 different types of attributes depending on what you go with. And basically, it just enables you to spawn remnants at the end of the day. And obviously, remnants are now the one of the pickup items for like spellcasters to be able to infuse your skills to do more damage or give it unique modifiers, right? Electrocuting arrow is no longer a movement skill, and now shoots an arrow forward that explodes, applying electrocuting rod to all enemies hit. It now does 281% attack damage at gem level 20, as opposed to 572, so I did cop a bit of a slapping here. Attack speed is now 80% of base, and mana cost has been reduced approximately 40% at all gem levels. So arguably, like, its damage is nerfed, but you can output it like almost 2 times as quick. So there's a trade there. You can attack faster, or it has less cost, but it does less damage. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. And then they basically scaled up. You get an extra 10% of damage as extra lightning damage for hits against targets with attached rods, which is an improvement. So, like, when you sort of stack that up, you can cast it, a bit quicker because you can afford to cast it. It still does 10% lift up in lightning damage. It just does does about 50% less damage, but that's compensated for by the sustainability of the skill. Frostbomb basically just cop a nerf overall, from what I can see here. It's more about being a utility skill as opposed to being a like an attack skill, and it now has a limit of 1, which is interesting. So like early on, you used to spam Frost Bomb in Act 1 to just nuke enemies, and now you can't necessarily do that. Is that a disadvantage? I don't really think so, because there's a lot of other changes that they've sort of brought in that will compensate for that. And the next one is Rower Mount. Now grants 15% increased movement speed while mounted. However, it grants 80% less movement speed penalty while using, previously 100%, approximately cancelling out the bonus while using a skill. Heavy stun build up on you now starts decaying if you avoid getting hit for 2 seconds while riding the rower. I would assume that this is to try and attack builds that like just sit on the rower the whole time and blast. Though I'm not 100% sure, I'm not very familiar with this mechanic at this stage. As to whether or not this is good or bad, I'm sure people that run this particular mechanic will put something out talking about it in the next day or so. But to me, this is a benign change because I'm never going to use the rower pet because I'm a warrior. Anyway, yeah, that's pretty much the run through. Look, I think like there always has to be good with the bad here, right? That's just how patch notes work. The big tick-offs here are like, Ice Tomb is such a cool unique. I hope they do this with a lot of other uniques and make it pretty unique like that. Obviously unique. Witch Hunter, this is totally wild. Like there's going to be some cool build sort of elements that could come from this, and I sort of want to play with this now. Having a whole tree that can be just flipped on the fly is pretty damn cool. And obviously the new run setup, the keep sprinting sort of interface is bloody awesome. So I love that. That's pretty much a change made without actually needing to ask for a change made. I hope GGG continues on this trend of how they're patching the game. This is a really positive looking sort of set of changes. And obviously we've still got 3 days before the league starts, so, or 2 days before the league start. So yeah, we still may see more patching on the daily. Obviously the trade websites pretty much getting totally, or you know, embedded into the game itself, which is nuts. But yeah, anyway, let's hope we see more of this. Anyway, if you like these types of videos, just going through patch notes and talking about mechanics and stuff like that, don't forget to like and sub to the channel. And there'll be definitely more content coming out over the next 2 days. And obviously, I'm going to be live streaming probably 24 hours if I can over the league launch. So that should be pretty awesome as well. But anyway, I'll see you guys later on and have a good one.